Hello, BrookingsBiology students. This is Mrs. Vanderwall, and today we're going to be working with the second part of these notes on the Chapter 8, Section 3, the reactions of photosynthesis. So your packet looks like this to begin with, and we need to go down a number of slides. All right. So the light-dependent reaction we found out needed light and water for plants to thrive and look healthy. They give off oxygen during the daytime, and ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and NADPH are generated and are used in the Calvin cycle. Now the Calvin cycle usually takes place in the night, so in the past it has been called the dark reaction. It takes carbon dioxide in at night, and this is when it produces the sugars, and so it could be a glucose or sucrose or fructose or galactose, or there are many different types of sugar. So this formula on the right hand side is referring to all the different combinations that a plant could produce. So what happens here we have our chloroplast, and you got the thylakoid stack here of the granum. That's where the light dependent reaction takes place, and it produces ATP and NADPH from the light reaction. The Calvin cycle takes place within the stroma, and it needs carbon dioxide, and it takes it in through the stomata, and the plant's able to get it to the stroma part of the chloroplast, and it produces sugars. It also produces ADP plus phosphate, and it produces NADPH plus, which is nicotinamide adenosine dinucleotide phosphate, which is required for the light-dependent reaction. And now I'll take you to a video.
The light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis take place in the thylakoids. Light energy powers the formation of two types of high-energy compounds. One compound is NADPH, and the other is ATP. The plant cell uses the energy in these compounds during the second phase of photosynthesis, called the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle takes place in the fluid stroma surrounding the thylakoids. Each turn of the Calvin cycle builds one small subunit that leaves the loop. These small subunits are the building blocks for sugars and starches. The starting compound for the Calvin cycle is a 5-carbon compound called RuBP. During the first step of the cycle, one molecule of carbon dioxide is added to each of 3 RuBP molecules. The plant absorbs carbon dioxide from the surrounding air. The 3 RuBPs become 6-carbon molecules. Each of these molecules splits in half, forming 6 3-carbon molecules called PGA. 6 ATPs must be spent to energize the 6 PGAs. Then 6 NADPHs must be spent to energize the PGAs still further. These 3-carbon molecules are now called PGAL. Of the 6 PGALs formed, 5 remain in the Calvin cycle while 1 exits. As the cycle continues, the 5 PGALs rearrange back into 3 molecules of 5-carbon RuBP. This requires 3 more ATPs. Each turn of the Calvin cycle, the 5-carbon RuBPs accept carbon dioxide molecules. 6 new PGALs form at the cost of ATPs and NADPHs. A PGAL molecule leaves the cycle, and the 5-carbon starting material is regenerated. The PGAL that left the Calvin cycle moves out of the chloroplast and into the plant cell's cytoplasm. Once in the cytoplasm, the PGAL can be combined with another PGAL into a 6-carbon glucose molecule or other sugar.
This diagram here that shows the Calvin cycle actually shows the cycle that has gone through it twice. So it's already done 2 turns. If you think of a clock going from 12 o'clock until midnight and going from 12 o'clock again to midnight, this is what this diagram represents. From the video they showed you for each turn, for each going from a complete 12-hour clock from 12 o'clock noon till midnight, they went through it once and then they went through it twice. Now they mentioned a bunch of things in the video that you do not need to know. You don't need to know the name of Ruby P. You don't need to know PGA. You don't need to know PGAL. We won't ask that. We do need you to know how many ATP are used in this Calvin cycle and how many NADPHs. And you can see here that combined total, you need 12 ATP here on this part of the Calvin cycle and 12 more NADPH. Now this is for the completion of 2 turns. Or from 2 turns we get 1 glucose, 1 sugar, and this shows the sugar down here. It also needs additional 6 more ATP over here, and this 5 carbon molecule is regenerated at the end. I tried the other day on this C Calvin cycle animation and we can't get the internet part to connect with that, so we'll continue on. The Calvin cycle is also known as the light-independent reaction, and in the past there are some textbooks that call this the dark reaction. It does not require light for this to happen. It does happen in the stroma between the thylakoids, so it's in the solution outside of the granum, but it's still within the chloroplast. NADPH donates hydrogen electrons, and ATP donates the energy that's necessary to get the plant to produce sugars at night. Carbon dioxide is required, and what's interesting about it is both the carbon and oxygen go into the sugar molecule. The oxygen at the beginning in the light-dependent reaction went out into the atmosphere during the daytime. So the oxygen that's in a glucose molecule comes from carbon dioxide but does not come from the water that happened in the light-dependent reaction. Factors that affect photosynthesis: the amount of water. We find with our crops when we go through a drought that they just shut down. What I mean by shutting down is that they don't get any bigger. Our corn plants aren't growing any taller. They just stop growing. And so a lot of times that's what will happen, and then you'll start seeing deterioration of the leaf. The leaf starts turning brown, 1 leaf at a time, or maybe just the edge of leaves all over a plant. So water is one of the raw materials needed, so a shortage of water can slow, but it also can cause it to stop photosynthesizing. Desert plants and conifers that live in dry conditions have a waxy coat on their leaves to prevent water loss. They also have fewer stomata. It's important in the fall of the year to water any of the conifers or your evergreens. And you need to do this because sometimes in the wintertime it can warm up enough to get the sap going again in a tree. And if the ground is frozen, the plant can't take up any more water, and a lot of times that causes the conifer to turn all brown. Factors that affect photosynthesis are temperature. This time of year is not a time, of course, that you can plant your crops outside. The ground is frozen. For one thing, it's hard as rock. Another thing is plants die after they get beneath 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but there are some plants that are even more susceptible and can't handle the cold and may even die before it even reaches 32 degrees. Photosynthesis enzymes function best between 0 and 35 degrees Celsius, and for us we find our corn and soybeans really like temperatures above freezing clear to, well, way above freezing, but the optimum temperature is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Above 86, we find that our plants also begin to shut down. At temperatures above or below the range, photosynthesis, of course, will slow or stop, and conifers in the winter may carry out photosynthesis only occasionally. When it does, it really needs water, and so that's why they want us to, in the fall of the year, again, water your plants. Enzymes work best at a certain temperature and certain pH. And so, for example, hydrangeas are a plant that you might not be familiar with. They have looks like snowball blossoms to it. And you can change the color of the blossom by just the pH of the soil. Something basic will turn the hydrangea blossom blue, and a soil that is acidic will cause the blossom instead to be pink. So that's one of the things kind of interesting with plants that it can do. Conditions that are too acidic or too hot cause proteins to unwind or denature, and so it changes shape and it can't perform like it once did. Denaturing changes the shape of the enzyme, making it not work. Homeostasis is keeping the pH and temperature constant, is important for maintaining enzyme function. Factors that affect photosynthesis. Light intensity. More light increases the rate of photosynthesis up to a certain level until plant reaches its maximum rate of photosynthesis. Let's say at home you have a plant and you put a lamp, like a reading lamp, close to the plant. If you put it up right next to the leaves, you're going to cause the leaves to get too crispy and burn. And so they'll turn brown within a short period of time. You could even kill the plant. And if you put that reading light clear on the other side of the room, it's really not doing it any good for the plant to be so far away. But there is a crucial distance that actually the plant can thrive by an artificial light upon it. And you'll see that it's greener and healthier and tends to grow. In the winter time, we are tilted away from the sun. So plants don't get direct sunlight, and of course the ground is frozen, so this isn't a time of year to have plants outdoors. But in the summertime, even though technically we're many, many more miles away from the sun than we are in the wintertime, our tilt is towards the sun, and so we get what's called direct light. And direct light is the optimal light that we need to have photosynthesis for our plants. The big picture is photosynthesis provides us with oxygen in the light-dependent reaction, and we breathe, and the sugars the heterotrophs like us consume to survive. That happens in this light-independent reaction. So overall, in the photosynthesis equation, we got carbon dioxide plus water plus light going into the plant, and the plant's going to generate sugars and oxygen. So photosynthesis in the light-dependent reaction uses both energy from sunlight, but we also had in this area too that we also need to water a plant. It takes place in the thylakoid membrane. It produced ATP, adenosine triphosphate, NADPH, and oxygen, which is important for us to breathe. The Calvin cycle takes place within the stroma, which is still in the chloroplast. And in order for the Calvin cycle to work, it needs the ATP and NADPH that came from the light-dependent reaction. Plus, we just found out it needs carbon dioxide for it to build sugars. And what it produces is high-energy sugars, and it produced ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and it produced NADP+, which is nicotinamide adenosine dinucleotide phosphate. So the diagram's kind of complete, but really you need CO2 up here with the uses, and over here on the produce you need ADP, and I'd write NADP+ on this side over here. And that concludes what we've learned in part 2 of the light independent, also known as Calvin cycle reactions.